for various reasons, study and other things, but I've primarily lived in Fitzroy as a resident, and I've had jobs in Fitzroy as well.
Okay. So your family moved to Fitzroy? They migrated here?
Yeah.
Why did they migrate to Fitzroy or places?
Well, my family migrated to Fitzroy because there was already an extended family network who had migrated to Australia post-war, post-Second World War. And so it just happened to be Fitzroy that my family settled in. I could have been anywhere else, I guess. My family would have followed itself wherever it located. But I think it was because Fitzroy was a cheap area to live in, and it was suitable for the pockets of migrants without much money.
So you went to school in Fitzroy?
Yeah, I did actually. When we first arrived in Australia, my siblings and I went to St Bridget's, which is a Catholic primary school, but that was only for a short period. The nuns were kind of mean to us there. My mother didn't like the way they treated us, so we ended up being enrolled at North Fitzroy Primary, which is also known as Alfred Crescent, and then on to Fitzroy High School after that.
And how was Fitzroy High?
Fitzroy was a school, one of the underprivileged schools, if you like. There are lots of students, not many teachers. Sorry, the ratio would have been pretty poor. Heaps of students per teacher, very rough and ready. Not a very amazing pass rate at Year 12 level. So I don't think it was a school that wasn't really geared for the academic scene, if you like.
And are you an academic now?
I'm not working as an academic, but I've studied postgraduate level, so I don't know if that makes me an academic.
So what sort of ethnicity was at Fitzroy High?
Fitzroy High comprised mainly Greeks. It was probably half the students were Greek, the other half were mixed bag. People of Anglo-Celtic background, Italians, Yugoslavs, some from the Middle East, Asian. When I say Asian, I mean Vietnamese. To Vietnamese students, Turkish, yeah.
Okay, so from your experience of growing up in Fitzroy, do you think, and your experience with living in other parts of the country, city, do you think that Fitzroy has its own particular identity?
Fitzroy's identity is in a constant state of flux, I think, because depending on, it's usually the economic circumstances of the people who migrate to the area that determine to a large degree what kind of community it ends up becoming. What it was like in the 70s when I grew up in Fitzroy, it was pretty much an working class suburb full of lots of poor people, and now it seems to be filled with the gentry professional class. So that changes the nature of the community. The biggest change being that you don't really know who your neighbours are so much anymore. Yeah.
So you think that lots of people with money moving to the area has meant a breakdown in the structure in the community?
You could call it a breakdown of the working class community, but I guess that where there's a breakdown, there's also a rebuilding going on, and that's, look at the architecture of the area and the kind of services that are available in the area now. That's been a direct result of the change in the demographics. So, yeah, there are better services now than what there used to be, from my recollection. So I guess in the old days, people seemed to rely on each other a bit more for things like the crossing over or the handing over of information, whereas now it's done through a remote kind of method where you know which parts of the community service may service your needs, and you just go directly to them. You don't really do it through a community based conduit.
So Why do you think that people from other suburbs moved to Fitzroy? Why do you think they moved here, gentrified or trying to?
Well, it could have a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the working class migrants who lived in the area, who moved to the area post-war, set up their own networks of entertainment, things like restaurants and cafes and, you know, men's bars and espresso bars and those kind of things. And, you know, that kind of attracted a cosmopolitan flavour. It initiated a cosmopolitan kind of flavour, which a lot of this, the general Australian community probably hadn't engaged with before. And it was attractive because it meant breaking from the traditional kind of suburban, kind of Anglo, waspy kind of sterility. And of course, as a direct result of that, land value increased dramatically, and that effectively displaced a lot of poorer people who were living in the area. So the poorer people who may have helped set up the so-called bohemian metropolitan flavour to the place were also the victims of their own initiation. Sure.
So, what things do you see in the past that helped to form a community in Fitzroy?
Well, the kind of things that help to form a community is communication between the members in any community. And in the old days, I'm talking about the 1970s, there seemed to be lots of children in the streets. You just hung out as a kid. You just hung out with other kids, even if you didn't know them. And so, you know, you had packs of roving children playing at various centres in Fitzroy, at the park, at the creek, wherever the case may be. And so that was a way of mingling outside of your own ethnic group, if you like. So you got to meet people, you got to integrate with people from various backgrounds. And it wasn't something that was planned. It was impromptu. It was out of need. The social services for kids weren't that great in the area. So you hung out with each other as a form of entertainment. And that did create a sense of community amongst younger people. It doesn't necessarily mean that the parents hung out. They already had their established networks amongst their own ethnic groups. And from my experience, a lot of them didn't really travel outside of their own ethnic group. So there were lots of communities within the Fitzroy community. So there was a multiplicity working, and it seemed to work quite fine. Didn't really notice tension so much.
What about pubs? Do you think pubs have played a role in Fitzroy's identity and community?
I think pubs have definitely played a role in Fitzroy's identity and sense of community. Now, you know, because I'm of an Italian background, a lot of the Italian families that I knew of, the older people from the families, they didn't seem to be pub goers as such. Their community network seemed to have more to do with associating with each other in their homes or at various sites throughout Fitzroy parks, you know, that kind of thing. But pubs seem to have played a larger part with me from the time I was a teenager, and they were places to congregate and just socialise and get pissed, pretty much.
Do you have a local pub now?
I don't. There are so many pubs in Fitzroy that I don't actually have a particular local pub, because pubs have there's Dr. Jekyll's and Mr. Hyde's in Fitzroy. On weekends, you have an influx of people from the suburbs who pretty much take up all the space in pubs, and so you avoid those ones. You avoid pubs like the Punters or the Builder's Arms, or I mean, pretty much all of them, especially within the main entertainment precincts of Fitzroy, the Smith Streets and the Brunswick Streets, Gertrude Streets. So, you know, you've got that on the weekends, but then the Fitzroy, or the local crowd, hangs out at the same pubs, and those pubs assume a completely different identity on the weekends. They're not as full. You can actually chat without having to bump into people every second or every step of the way. So they are meeting places, but you're confined to weekdays.
So what do you see as the biggest threat to Fitzroy, or things that could negative change Fitzroy in the future?
Negative changes to Fitzroy in the future have a lot to do with economics, from what I see, in that you pretty much can't afford to live here unless you're on a high income and you can afford your own property or you can afford high rent. That's a bit of a shame, of course, because that displaces people on lower incomes who may have a lot to contribute to the community, especially, you know, artists and people that work in the arts community within the area. I mean, a lot of people that I work with or know of who hang out in Fitzroy that are artists don't necessarily live here anymore. They're living in places like Northcote and Preston because it's cheaper. You know, it's an economic bias. There's an economic bias working in that the more you earn, the more likely you are to live in an entertaining or metropolitan area such as Fitzroy.
Is there anything that you see as particularly Australian about Fitzroy? Like, international? What sort of big pictures are there?
Big pictures are, that's a tough one. Well, I mean, you've got your crappy kind of takeaway food places. They seem to be the face of. So Craig, can you ask that one again?
Yeah. Okay. So, if you.
Yeah.
What do you see as particularly Australian, or your understanding of what it is to be Australian, that is to locate itself at Fitzroy? You know what I mean? What's Australian about Fitzroy?
The thing that's most Australian about Fitzroy, whatever that means, whatever Australian means, is that you have multiplicity of people of various backgrounds, various incomes, trying to coexist, and it's fairly successful. I mean, not all of Australia has places full of diverse people from diverse backgrounds, but to me that's what Australia seems to represent and seems to encourage. Otherwise we'll end up back in the 50s where there was a fairly kind of linear existence, which was pretty much based on the WASP notion of progression and righteousness. That's changed a hell of a lot, I think, and I don't think I could live in a society that's like that, and I don't think many people would want to either.
So where do you live now?
I live in Fitzroy now.
And you live in a share house?
I live in this share house with 4 other people. It's based. That's an economic imperative, pretty much. I'm not a high-income earner. I work in the arts sector, so in a sense, I'm forced to live in a share house situation. It's cheaper, the sharing of bills. And it's not necessarily a negative thing because you're living with people who share similar values to an extent. So that's not such a bad thing. I have lived in a house with people that had completely different ideas to me, and that's good as well, but it can only go so far.
Okay. So just on the globalisation, completely. What do you understand about globalisation? Or what do you think globalisation is? Globalisation,
to me, represents probably the worst aspects of money management on an international scale. Trying to run things as efficiently as possible at the expense of so it's the dollar imperative at the expense of a human imperative. It's a slash and burn approach that affects people at all levels of community and society, in that you will try and you get conglomerates who pretty much try and establish themselves as international identities within your own community, and you're supposed to feel as happy about being part of this theoretical global village. which is a notion that's been created by corporations, not people. Villages have existed from day one, on a human scale. I don't know why corporations are reinventing the term. It's never actually left. They've just appropriated it to legitimise their existence within the community. And most people aren't stupid. They realise what a wank the whole setup is, and they're rejecting it. You get your S11 protests, you're getting your M1 protests. You have a rejection of homogenisation within the community. People don't like being told how to live.
So you see globalisation, negative force on your life in Fitzroy?
It is, globalisation, I guess, has impacted in places like Fitzroy on a fairly more latent level at the moment. Who knows where it's going to go, but just things like, breweries trying to take over, if you gave them the chance and they had enough money, they'd probably, take over all the pubs. And you see things like the thematic bullshit Irish pubs where you have, pressed icons and just pressed memorabilia. When I say pressed, I mean formed, not real hand-me-downs, if you like, just things you can buy at any catering supply place, which you adorn your pub with that. You call it Irish Ryans or something, and all of a sudden you've got some kind of identity within the suburb. Yeah.
In Fitzroy, do you see, maybe since you was growing up, you mentioned it was a poor suburb, but do you see some extremes of poverty here still?
Yeah, you do see extremes.
That you haven't seen before?
Well, the extremes, I guess, in poverty in Fitzroy are far more marked now because, I never saw things like Porsches driving around the streets of Fitzroy in the 70s, whereas now they're fairly passé, actually. So the extremities are highlighted. So the contrast is a lot greater. You still have low-income residents living in commission housing, government-aided and financed housing, but you also have people living a few blocks away who may own a $1 million property that's been fully refurbished to its Victorian grandeur. And with the Victorian grandeur comes a Victorian sense of isolation and dissipation of the poor. And so I guess it's a reversion to some historical.
So do you think that this person speak to each other?
Well, the poor and the poorer people and the richer people probably don't get a chance to speak to each other because they can't afford the same facilities and the same entertainments or restaurants. If you're on a low income, you're not going to spend $50 on a meal and fine wine. It just doesn't happen. It might make wealthy people feel like they're mingling. Hey, I'm real. I'm mingling with real people. But that's a conscious process. It's a fabrication to make us, to secure your own sense of belonging. It's not. There's no real sense of integration that I've kind of noticed. And poor people don't have a chance, don't have a choice in who moves into their areas. And they can form pressure groups and complain, but it's usually professionals with qualifications and education who know how to best access resources that'll help to entrench them in the suburb.
And do you think that the political ideology of rebellion and alternativeness has changed in Fitzroy? Do you think it's still got that flavour, that political flavour of resistance? Or
I don't think that the flavour of resistance is that great in Fitzroy. You might see it adorned on people's bodies, but that's more of their tribal markings rather than forms of rebellion, I think. You get younger people and students, the educated class, if you like, who have a voice and would like to express their dissension, I guess, and that's a pretty important process in democracy. We all listen to economic rationalist yuppieism, it'd be as boring as hell. So that sense of rebelliousness, I can't say I've really noticed it in any big way. I mean, when was the last time, I don't think I've seen a protest in Fitzroy since the freeway was opened, the the Eastern Freeway was opened. That was the last time I saw a community protest in Fitzroy. Cool.